Our life was a perfect picture, the kind you see in magazines. We lived in a lovely 2-story house with a white picket fence that I painted every spring. I planted roses along the walkway, and their sweet smell filled the air on summer evenings. Inside, everything had its place. The floors shone, the pillows on the sofa were always perfectly fluffed, and a warm meal was on the table every night at 6. From the outside, anyone looking in would think we had it all. They would see Leo, my handsome, hard-working husband, and me, his devoted wife, living out a quiet, happy dream. Leo restored classic cars for a living. He had a gift for taking something old and broken and making it beautiful again. He'd come home with grease under his fingernails and a tired look in his eyes, but he always had a smile for me. At least, he used to. For the last year, something had changed. The picture we presented to the world had started to crack, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. The smiles became a memory. He started coming home later and later, sometimes well after I had gone to bed. He'd smell of grease, yes, but also of a sharp, unfamiliar cologne that wasn't the one I bought him for Christmas. The biggest change was his phone. It had become a part of him, an extension of his hand that he guarded like a treasure. If I walked into the room while he was texting, the phone would be flipped over onto its screen in a single, smooth motion. He'd take it with him into the bathroom when he showered. He told me it was just work. He had a new client, a man named Nathan, who was apparently very rich and very demanding about the vintage car Leo was restoring for him. "This car is his baby, Clara," Leo would say, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "He messages me at all hours. He needs it to be perfect." I tried so hard to believe him. I wanted to be the wife who trusted her husband, the woman who didn't let doubt poison her heart. So, I kept our perfect picture looking its best. I smiled, I cooked his favorite meals, and I waited up for him, hoping the man I married would walk through the door instead of this tired, distant stranger. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach, a cold and heavy knot, only grew tighter. The silence between us at the dinner table became so loud it was deafening. We were living in the same house, but we were miles apart. This past Saturday, he told me he had to go into the shop for a few hours. "Nathan wants to see how the car is coming along," he said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. It felt like a bird brushing against my skin, light and gone in an instant. I watched him drive away, and as his car disappeared around the corner, a strange idea took hold of me. I never, ever cleaned his car. It was his space, a chaotic mess of tools, oily rags, and parts catalogs. But today, I had to. I felt a desperate need to search. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find it. I needed the waiting and wondering to be over. My hands were shaking as I opened the passenger door. I started there, throwing away old coffee cups and crumpled receipts. My heart was pounding with a rhythm of hope and fear. Please let me find nothing, I thought. Please let this all be in my head. Then I moved to the driver's side. I pulled out the heavy rubber floor mat and vacuumed the dirt underneath. Finally, with my breath held tight in my chest, I reached my hand under the driver's seat, sweeping my fingers across the carpeted floor. My fingers brushed against something small, smooth, and plastic. I wrapped my hand around it and pulled it out. It was a small, white tube. The label was simple, with blue lettering that spelled out the brand name of a popular personal lubricant. The world around me went completely silent. I couldn't hear the birds chirping in the garden or the gentle hum of the refrigerator from the house. All I could hear was the frantic, roaring beat of my own heart. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't for me. We hadn't been together like that in months. He had touched me with hands that had touched someone else. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw the tube against the garage wall. A strange and terrible calm washed over me, cold and clear as ice. My sadness and my fear burned away, leaving behind something hard and sharp, anger. A quiet, patient anger. I walked out of the car and into the garage, Leo's workshop. I looked at the tall metal shelves where he kept all his supplies. There were cans of engine cleaner, bottles of wax, and a neat row of adhesives for his restoration work. My eyes landed on one particular tube. It was for bonding leather and metal inside car interiors. The tube was almost identical in size and shape to the one I was holding. On the front was a bright red warning label. It said the contents were permanent and fast-acting. Without a second thought, I took the tube of lubricant into the kitchen. I squeezed every last drop of it down the sink drain and watched the clear gel disappear. I rinsed the empty tube with hot water, over and over, until it was perfectly clean. I dried it carefully with a paper towel. Then I returned to the garage. My hands were perfectly steady now. I unscrewed the cap on the industrial glue and squeezed the thick, clear adhesive into the empty tube until it was full. It looked exactly the same. I screwed the white cap back on and walked back to the car. I knelt down and placed the tube of glue exactly where I had found it, tucked deep under the driver's seat, hidden in the dark. I closed the car door, went back inside my perfect house, and I waited. After I put the tube of glue back under the driver's seat, I walked back into the house and continued with my Saturday chores as if nothing had happened. My movements were precise and automatic. I dusted the picture frames on the mantel, including the large one from our wedding day where we were both smiling so brightly. I polished the dining room table until I could see my own blank reflection in it. On the outside, I was a perfect wife in a perfect house. On the inside, a bomb was ticking, a fuse I had lit with my own 2 hands. Now, all I could do was wait for the explosion. Leo came home a few hours later, whistling a cheerful tune. He walked into the kitchen, dropped his keys on the counter with a clatter, and kissed the top of my head. "What a day," he said, smiling. "But I think Nathan is finally happy with the progress. It's going to be a beautiful machine when it's done." He didn't notice that his car, which was usually a mess, was now spotless inside and out. He didn't notice the strange, tight look on my face or the way my hands gripped the edge of the sink. He was oblivious, lost in his own world of lies and secrets. His good mood was like a slap in the face. Was he happy because he was getting away with it? Did he really think I was that blind? That foolish? I forced a smile and asked him if he was hungry. The next few days were the slowest, most agonizing torture I have ever known. Sunday was quiet. We worked in the garden together, pulling weeds and trimming the rose bushes. Every time he knelt down, I wondered if he was thinking about his secret. Every time he smiled at me, I felt a wave of nausea. I was living a lie, playing the part of the happy, trusting wife, while my mind raced with dark thoughts. The tube of glue sat in his car, a silent promise of the chaos to come. The week began, and the routine was a blessing and a curse. It gave me something to do, but it also stretched the waiting out into an eternity. Every morning, I would make him coffee and watch from the kitchen window as he got into his car to leave for work. My heart would pound in my chest. Was today the day? Would he reach for it on his lunch break? The car would pull away, and I would be left alone in the silent house, the tension coiling tighter and tighter inside me. I spent my days cleaning things that were already clean. I organized the pantry, rearranged the bookshelf, and scrubbed the floors until they gleamed. Anything to keep my hands busy, to stop my mind from picturing what was going to happen. I imagined the scene over and over again, each time a little different, a little more vivid. What would his face look like? Would he be angry? Scared? I jumped every time the phone rang, my stomach dropping, thinking it was the call that would tell me it was all over. Leo, meanwhile, had never been in better spirits. He came home on Tuesday and told me he'd gotten a bonus for his good work. On Thursday, he brought me flowers, the first time he had done that in over a year. "Just because," he said, handing me the bouquet of yellow tulips. I put them in a vase and set them on the table, a beautiful, vibrant lie in the center of our home. His cheerfulness was cruel. It felt like he was celebrating his secret life right in front of my face, so sure of himself, so confident that I would never find out. The anger I felt was so cold and pure, it kept me going. It kept me from breaking down. Then, Friday arrived. The day felt different from the moment I woke up. The air was heavy, charged with a strange energy. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that today was the day. Leo came home from the shop around 5. Just like usual, he went upstairs and took a long shower. I could hear the water running, and I pictured him washing away the grease from work, getting ready for his real life, the one that didn't include me. He came downstairs wearing the nice dark blue shirt I bought him for his birthday, and he smelled strongly of that cologne, the one that made my stomach twist into a knot. He walked over to me as I stood at the stove, pretending to stir a pot of soup. "I have to work late tonight," he said, his voice casual. The words I had been waiting all week to hear. "Just need to put a few final touches on Nathan's car. He's coming by the shop to see it. I'll probably be home after midnight." I didn't turn around. I just kept stirring the soup, which wasn't even simmering. "Okay," I said. My voice was calm, even a perfect imitation of a normal wife. "Be safe." He came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders, giving them a gentle squeeze. He leaned in and gave me a quick, empty kiss on the cheek. It was cold and passionless. It was the kiss of a liar. It was the last time he would ever touch me like that. "I'll see you later," he said. And then he was gone. I heard the front door open and close. I heard his car start up and drive away. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, and then there was only silence. The moment he was gone, I turned off the stove. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't turn on a single lamp. I just sat there in the growing darkness, my phone in my hand, my heart a heavy, steady drum in my chest. The bomb was about to go off. I had built it, I had planted it, and now I was going to sit and wait for the explosion. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, each deep dong echoing through the silent house. Then it chimed 11, then 12. Midnight came and went, and Leo was still not home. I remained on the couch, a statue in the moonlight, my phone resting on my lap like a small dark stone. Buster, my golden retriever, had long since given up trying to get my attention and was now sleeping at my feet, his soft snores the only sound in the room besides the clock. At first, my waiting was fueled by a cold, hard anger. I felt like a judge waiting for a verdict to be read, a verdict I had already decided. I pictured Leo with this Nathan, pictured the moment they would reach for the tube, the confusion, the ruined evening. A small, bitter smile would touch my lips in the darkness. He deserved it. He deserved to have his secret, dirty little world collapse around him. He had taken our perfect life and smashed it, and this was his punishment. But as the hours ticked by, a new feeling began to creep in, unwelcome and unsettling. 1 o'clock. The anger started to feel less satisfying and more like a heavy weight. The silence of the house began to feel less like a peaceful vigil and more like a lonely, empty void. 2 o'clock. A cold dread, thin and sharp as a needle, pricked at the edges of my anger. What if I was wrong? What if there was a real emergency? What if he'd gotten into a car accident on the way to the shop, and I was sitting here waiting for a revenge that would never come? I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. I had promised myself I wouldn't call, that I would let the events unfold on their own. But the anger was gone now, replaced by a raw, churning anxiety. My husband, the man I had loved for 10 years, was out there somewhere, and I didn't know where he was. Betrayal or not, the fear was real. I was about to press the call button when the screen of my phone suddenly lit up, blinding me in the dark room. The screen read, "Blocked number." My heart stopped. My entire body went rigid. A blocked number at 2:30 in the morning could only mean one thing: trouble. My hand trembled so much I almost dropped the phone as I swiped to answer. I pressed it to my ear, my own breathing loud and ragged. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice coming out as a dry croak. For a second, there was nothing but a faint crackle of static. I thought maybe they had hung up. Then, a voice came through the line, so faint and strained with pain that I almost didn't recognize it. "Clara?" It was Leo, but it wasn't his normal voice. He was whispering, and his words were tight and sharp, as if it hurt him to speak. "Leo, where are you? What's happened?" I demanded, my fear instantly confirming that something was terribly, terribly wrong. "Listen to me," he gasped, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "There's been an accident. A terrible accident. I'm stuck." The word hung in the air between us. "Stuck?" I repeated, my mind struggling to understand. The first thing I thought of was a car crash, his legs pinned under the dashboard. "What do you mean, you're stuck? Did you crash your car? Are you okay?" "No, not like that," he hissed, and his voice was so full of panic it made the hairs on my arm stand up. It's complicated. I need you to..." "Oh, no." His voice cut off. I heard a shuffling sound, like the phone was being dropped or moved, and then a sharp cry of pain. But it wasn't Leo's voice. It was another man, a deeper voice, crying out in pure agony. "Leo, what was that? Who is with you?" I shouted into the phone, my brief moment of worry for his safety evaporating and turning back into a white-hot rage mixed with horror. It was real. It was happening. "Don't yell," the other voice suddenly yelled, much closer to the phone now, his words sharp and desperate. "Just hang up, don't tell her anything." "I can't," I heard Leo cry out from a distance. "I need to tell her what to do." The other man's voice was no longer yelling, but had turned into a desperate, painful moan. "It hurts, Leo. God, it hurts so much. Just hang up the phone." Before I could scream his name again, before I could demand to know what was going on, there was a sharp click. The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the black screen. The silence in the house rushed back in, 10 times heavier than before. Stuck. A terrible accident. Another man crying in pain. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered in my mind, but they were starting to form a picture, a grotesque and horrifying image of what my perfect revenge had truly become. I was no longer a judge. I was a monster who had just created a nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. For a long time, perhaps 10 minutes, I didn't move. I sat on the couch in the dark, the dead phone still pressed against my ear. The silence in the house was a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering me. My mind replayed the last 30 seconds of the call on a loop. Leo's panicked whisper, the words stuck, the other man's cry of agony. What had I done? In my anger, I had pictured a ruined evening, an embarrassing mess, a confrontation. I had imagined shame. I had not imagined this. I had not imagined real physical pain. The cold satisfaction I had felt for days was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. I was trying to force my frozen limbs to move, to stand up, to do times something asterisk, when a sound tore through the silence of our sleepy suburban street. It was the piercing shriek of tires fighting against asphalt, a car braking far too hard and fast. My heart, which had been a dull thud, leaped into my throat. I scrambled off the couch and rushed to the window, pulling back the edge of the curtain just enough to see. A dark, expensive-looking sedan I'd never seen before was parked crookedly at the curb, its front wheel halfway onto the grass. The driver's side door flew open, and a man stumbled out. He looked around wildly, his silhouette stark against the glow of the streetlight. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure panic, and then his eyes locked onto my house. For a second, he just stood there, a statue of desperation. Then he started walking, a fast, clumsy stride that quickly became a full-on sprint right towards my front door. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. This was him. This had to be the man from the phone. Buster shot up from his spot on the floor, letting out a low, protective growl. The man didn't knock. He began to pound on the door with both fists, the heavy thuds vibrating through the floorboards. "Please!" he yelled, his voice muffled by the thick wood but still laced with frantic terror. "Please, I know you're in there. It's about Leo. You have to help us, please!" Each word was a hammer blow against my fragile composure. My hand was shaking so badly that I could barely work the deadbolt. My mind screamed at me not to open the door, to call the police, to hide. But a stronger, darker part of me knew I had to. This was my creation. I had to look it in the eye. I turned the lock and opened the door just a crack, the security chain still in place. The man on my porch was a complete stranger. He was tall and looked like he belonged in a boardroom, with an expensive watch on his wrist and what looked like a silk shirt, now hopelessly rumpled and stained with sweat. His face was pale and slick, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He was terrified. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice a fragile whisper. "My name is Nathan," he choked out, breathing in ragged gasps. The name hit me like a physical blow. Nathan, the demanding client, the perfect excuse. Leo and I, we have a problem. A really, really big problem. He's in my car. You need to come with me. Please." He gestured vaguely down the street towards his poorly parked car. He couldn't even look at me. His eyes darted from the ground to the doorframe to the dark street behind him, anywhere but at my face. The shame was rolling off him in waves. "What kind of problem?" I asked, my voice gaining a strange, cold strength. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear him say something. I needed to see him squirm in the web I had spun. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It's hard to explain," he stammered. "It's a medical emergency. He's hurt. We're both hurt. Please, just come." A cold resolve washed over me, pushing the fear and the panic down into a deep, dark place inside me. I had lit this fire. Now I had to walk into the flames. I unhooked the security chain and pulled the door open. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind me, leaving Buster whining on the other side. "Okay," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Show me." I followed Nathan off the porch and onto the sidewalk. He walked quickly, staying close to the shadows cast by the neighbors' perfectly trimmed hedges, as if he could somehow hide from the moonlight itself. Each step I took felt heavy, deliberate. I was walking towards the scene of a crime, and I was the one who had committed it. I followed Nathan down the quiet, moonlit sidewalk. The night air was cool on my skin, a stark contrast to the fire raging in my stomach. He walked with a frantic, shuffling gait, staying close to the manicured hedges that lined our neighbors' yards as if he could somehow melt into the shadows and disappear. He stopped beside his sleek, dark car, a machine so new it still had that fresh off-the-lot smell, now tainted with something else. He fumbled with the keys in his pocket, his hands shaking so violently that he dropped them on the pavement. With a muffled curse, he snatched them up and finally managed to press the unlock button. The car beeped softly, an obscene sound in the dead of night. He turned to me, his face a ghostly white in the pale glow of the street lamp. His eyes were wide, pleading, and filled with a terror that was now mirroring my own. "Prepare yourself," he whispered, his voice cracking. It's really bad." He reached out and pulled the handle of the back door. It swung open with a soft click. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a sharp chemical odor, like a freshly opened can of paint, but it was mixed with the metallic scent of blood and the raw animal smell of pure, unadulterated fear. The dome light inside the car flickered on, casting a pale, sickly glow over the scene within, and it was a scene from a nightmare. It was a grotesque sculpture of human suffering, far more horrifying than anything my vengeful mind could have ever conjured. Leo was in the back seat, his body twisted at an impossible, agonizing angle. He wasn't with Nathan. He was with another man, a stranger whose face I couldn't see, as it was pressed into the leather of the seat, and they were stuck, fused. My industrial-grade glue, the solution I had so calmly and carefully prepared, had done its job with a terrifying efficiency. It had bonded them together at the height of their secret passion, creating a permanent, nightmarish embrace. They were a single, writhing entity of pain and shame. Leo's face was a mask of sheer agony. It was streaked with tears and sweat, his skin deathly pale except for the bright, angry red marks on his arm and shoulder. The other man was whimpering, a low, guttural sound of pure misery. They had clearly tried to pull apart. In their panic, they had only made it worse, tearing at their own skin, making the bond an excruciating, bloody mess. The back seat was a chaotic landscape of tangled limbs, discarded clothing, and dark, glistening patches of the adhesive that now held them prisoner. I stood there on the quiet suburban sidewalk, staring into the car, and my brain split in two. One part of me was a cold, detached observer, cataloging the horrifying details with a clinical precision. The specific angle of Leo's arm, the way the fabric of his shirt was permanently bonded to the other man's skin, the dark, almost black color of the glue where it had mixed with blood. The other part of my brain was just screaming. A silent, endless scream. This wasn't what I had wanted. I had wanted to expose a lie, to shatter his secret world. I had wanted him to feel a fraction of the humiliation I felt. I had not wanted this. I had not wanted to create a monster. Nathan, who had apparently been nothing more than the driver and a terrified bystander, was wringing his hands beside me. "We were at the shop," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. And it just happened so fast. The tube. Leo said it was lubricant. He just grabbed it. By the time they realized something was wrong, It was too late. We tried everything. Water, soap. We even tried prying them apart with a screwdriver. Nothing worked. It just made it worse. He shuddered. We had to get him home. I didn't know what else to do. My stomach lurched, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The reality of my actions crashed down with the force of a physical blow. I had wanted revenge. But this wasn't revenge. This was torture. I had taken my husband's betrayal and transformed it into a grotesque physical horror. I had turned him and his lover into a single, suffering creature, trapped in a prison of my own making, right here in the back seat of a car on our perfect, quiet street. Then, Leo's eyes found mine. Through the haze of his pain, he saw me standing there. His eyes weren't filled with anger or hatred. They were filled with a profound and terrifying despair, a look of complete and utter brokenness. "Clara," he croaked, his voice cracking, barely audible. "Help me." That sound, his voice, so broken and desperate, shattered the last of my icy calm. It was the plea of a trapped animal. The cold, detached observer in my mind vanished, and all that was left was the screaming. I took a step back from the car, my hand flying to my mouth as if to hold it in, but it was too late. A scream, loud and piercing and filled with all the horror I had just witnessed, tore from my throat. It ripped through the silent night, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, announcing the end of all our secrets. The hospital was a sterile, brightly lit world that felt a million miles away from my dark, quiet home. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of the night shift and smelled sharply of antiseptic, a smell I would forever associate with the end of my marriage. I sat in a cold, unforgiving plastic chair in the emergency room waiting area, a ghost in the fluorescent glare. Nurses and doctors bustled past their faces, a mixture of professional concern and undisguised curiosity. I was the wife. I was the woman at the center of the night's bizarre main event. I sat there for hours while a team of specialists worked on Leo and the other man. A tired-looking doctor with kind eyes came out to speak to me once. He explained, in careful clinical terms, that the adhesive I had used was not designed for human skin. It had created a chemical bond, fusing them together on a cellular level. Separating them was a delicate and painful process, involving a cocktail of powerful solvents and a surgical procedure to carefully peel their skin apart, layer by layer. He told me they would both be left with what he called significant chemical burns and tissue damage. They would heal, but they would have scars. Permanent reminders. Nathan had given a brief, stammering statement to the police about a prank gone horribly wrong and then vanished into the night, leaving me to face the wreckage alone. The other man's family arrived at some point. A quiet, shell-shocked couple who were whisked away by a nurse to a private room, their faces etched with a confusion and shame that mirrored my own. The whole situation felt unreal, like a poorly written play, and I was an unwilling actor trapped on the stage. It was nearly dawn when a nurse approached me, her expression a careful blend of pity and professionalism. She told me Leo was out of the procedure and settled in a private room. She said I could see him now if I wanted to. I nodded numbly and followed her through a labyrinth of quiet hallways until we reached his door. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dim, the only light coming from the faint morning glow filtering through the blinds and the soft green light of a cardiac monitor. Leo was lying in the bed, looking impossibly small and frail. Thick white bandages were wrapped around his arm, his side, and his shoulder, stark against the pale blue of the hospital gown. He looked broken. The charming, confident man who had lied to me so effortlessly for months was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out stranger. He must have heard me come in, because his eyes fluttered open. When he saw me standing there at the foot of his bed, he flinched, a small, involuntary jerk, as if he were expecting me to scream, to rage, to throw something at him. But I had no rage left. The anger had burned out hours ago, leaving behind nothing but cold, empty ashes. We stayed like that for a long time, in a silence that was heavier and more profound than any silence we had ever shared in our home. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic beep of the monitor beside his bed, a steady counterpoint to the chaotic wreckage of our lives. Finally, he spoke. His voice was a hoarse, ragged whisper, raw from pain and exhaustion. I know you did it, Clara. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I didn't deny it. I didn't need to. I just gave a slow, deliberate nod. A single tear escaped from the corner of his eye and traced a path down his pale cheek. I don't blame you, he whispered. I deserve this. I deserve all of this. And more. And then, with the last of his defenses gone, he told me everything. He didn't make excuses or try to paint himself as a victim. He simply laid the ugly, pathetic truth out in the sterile air between us. He spoke of a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight, of the suffocating pressure to maintain the perfect picture of our life. He confessed that he felt like an actor in his own home, playing the part of the happy husband, and that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten who he really was. The affair, he explained, wasn't about love or even passion. It was a desperate, clumsy attempt to feel something, anything, other than the quiet, crushing emptiness of a life he had built but no longer wanted. He talked, and for the first time in years, I listened. There were no more secrets, no more lies. There was only the raw, painful truth of two people who had become strangers living under the same roof. He had been living a lie, and so had I, diligently polishing a picture frame that had been empty for a very long time. When he finally fell silent, his confession hanging in the air, he looked at me. His eyes were pleading, not for forgiveness or for another chance, but perhaps just for some kind of understanding. I'm sorry, Clara, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for breaking us. I looked at the man in the hospital bed, this stranger covered in bandages, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. You didn't break us, Leo, I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. We were already broken. You just showed me the pieces. I stood up from the chair. The decision felt simple, inevitable. Goodbye, Leo, I said, the words quiet but final. I turned and walked out of the hospital room without looking back. I walked down the long, empty hallway, past the nurses' station, and through the automatic doors that led to the outside world. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. I left the sirens, the shame, and the shattered pieces of my old life behind me in that sterile building. As I walked out into the cool morning air, I took my first deep breath of a new, terrifying, and uncertain future. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly free. My scream was the spark that lit the fuse of the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just a sound of fear. It was an alarm, a desperate signal that cut through the sleepy suburban silence and announced that something was terribly wrong on our pristine, quiet street. Before the echo of it had even faded, a light flicked on in the house directly across from us. A bedroom window slid open with a screech, and Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer with a finely tuned sense for trouble, poked his head out. Is everything all right over there? He called out, his voice thick with sleep but firm with authority. Nathan panicked instantly. No, he muttered, his hands flapping uselessly at his sides. He lunged for the car door, trying to slam it shut, to hide the grotesque scene in the back seat from the waking world. But it was too late. My scream had already painted a target on us. Mr. Henderson was squinting, his eyes adjusting to the dark, and he saw me, a lone figure standing frozen on the sidewalk. He saw Nathan, a frantic stranger trying to cover something up, and then his gaze fell upon the open car door and the impossible, tangled shape within. His posture changed immediately. The sleepy neighbor vanished, replaced by the veteran cop. Good heavens, he whispered, a phrase I could read on his lips even from across the street. He disappeared from the window for a second and reappeared with his phone already pressed to his ear. I'm calling 911, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the lawns. That was it. The point of no return. The private contained horror I had created was about to become a public spectacle. The next few minutes were a blur of escalating chaos. The distant, lonely wail of a single siren quickly grew, joined by another, and then another, until it felt like an entire fleet was descending upon our quiet little corner of the world. A police car was the first to arrive, its tires squealing as it rounded the corner, its flashing red and blue lights strobing across our houses, turning the familiar landscape into a frantic, pulsating nightmare. It was followed closely by a massive fire truck and then an ambulance. Doors began to open up and down the block. Mrs. Gable from next door, in her pink silk bathrobe, the Thompson family, all four of them huddled on their porch like frightened sheep. People I had only ever offered a polite wave to were now standing on their perfectly manicured lawns in pajamas and slippers, their faces masks of sleepy confusion and morbid fascination. The private, ugly secret of my marriage was now the neighborhood's late-night entertainment. The first two police officers who approached the car were young, and their faces were a mixture of professional calm and utter disbelief. They shone their flashlights into the back seat, and I saw their jaws tighten. One of them spoke into his radio, his voice low and urgent, using codes and jargon I couldn't understand. The paramedics were next. They were seasoned professionals, trained to handle trauma and crisis, but even they couldn't hide their shock. A young woman with a kind face took one look at the scene, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed to her partner. I've never seen anything like this." They tried to talk to Leo and the other man, to assess their injuries, but both were incoherent with pain and shame, their answers nothing more than broken sobs and pained moans. The firefighters, clad in their heavy, imposing gear, gathered around the car, their voices a low, serious rumble. They discussed options, solvents, cutting tools, the jaws of life. They talked about the possibility of removing the entire car seat, of taking the whole grotesque sculpture apart piece by piece at the hospital. And I just stood there, on the edge of the swirling chaos, completely alone. I had become invisible. The neighbors were starting to whisper amongst themselves, their voices carrying on the night air. Their fingers pointed at the car, then at me, then back at the car. I could feel their eyes on me, could almost hear their hushed words. "That's Clara, Leo's wife. What on earth is going on? Are those two men stuck together?" The humiliation was a physical force, a crushing weight pressing in on me from all sides. But it wasn't my humiliation to bear. It was Leo's. I had wanted to expose his secret life, to tear down the facade, and I had succeeded in a way I could never have imagined. His betrayal was no longer a private pain shared between the two of us. It was a bizarre, unfolding drama for the entire world to see. This wasn't just gossip. This was the kind of story that would be told for years, a local legend of shame and absurdity. As the paramedics and firefighters worked together to carefully maneuver Leo and the other man, still fused together, onto a specially designed stretcher, a profound and chilling numbness settled over me. I watched them load my husband into the back of the ambulance, his face hidden from the prying eyes of our neighbors, but his shame was naked for all to see. The perfect picture of our life was not just shattered, it had been incinerated, and its ashes were now scattering on the wind for everyone to witness. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt empty. A hollowed-out crater where my life used to be.